Hi, welcome to Integrative Preparedness, American Reversion, and Stonemont Church. I say that because I'm going to put this on all of the channels because it's about Thanksgiving. I hope you all had a great Thanksgiving. We had a wonderful Thanksgiving, as we always do. Our Thanksgivings are so busy, I never have time to do anything, a video before or on Thanksgiving, but our day after Thanksgiving is one of relaxation and kind of recuperating from the busyness of the days before. And we're going to do a few relaxing family things today. So I thought I'd sit down and talk a little bit about Thanksgiving. Um, Yesterday or the day before, I put up Rush Limbaugh's. If you're familiar with his real story of the first Thanksgiving, I put those up on all of the Patreon channels. If you haven't seen them, you can either go there or you can find it on YouTube. It's a very interesting thing to watch. He does a great job on it. But today I want to talk about, I'm going to read something from one of my books, my second book, The Revival, talking about a Stonemont Thanksgiving. Last night at dinner, at Thanksgiving dinner here at our house, Kelly reminded me, she was talking to some of the other, I think she was talking to her father, and mentioned the fact that I had narratives and journal entries from my family clear back into the 1700s and even to the 1600s. My first branch came over in the 1640s. But there was a journal entry that I used in the revival that when he's talking about Thanksgiving, and so I wanted to read that because it gives us some thoughts about Thanksgiving and what it's about, what we're about, what our future may be about, what we want to think about. And for those of you who have read the books, you'll remember this. It's funny that I get a lot of compliments on my eating scenes. People say, I love your scenes that you write about the food and the feasts and everything like that. And I won't go into what the whole series is about for those of you who may not know, but if you want to, you can find them on Amazon. And of course, the Squib tells you a little bit about them. But I'm talking about here, and this is the first Thanksgiving at Stonemont after the world has fallen apart. And it was a CME that shut down everything in the world. And they have rebuilt, and they've come together first as a family and then some friends. And they've come together then as a growing community of those people who were drawn, together to survive and to build and um, to bring each of their needs and abilities together to build the community that is Stonemont. So this is at the scene of the first Thanksgiving, and it's held in the central hall that they've built in the compound. And it's going to be Jim Wyatt, the main character, going to be talking. Let's see. I'll start. For those of you who like the food sequences, I'll start with that. But then we'll get down into the really important part. And this is him looking back on the night before. So the celebration the night before had been everything they had intended it to be. More really, resembling medieval feasts from the movies combined with the glow and quiet of a true American Thanksgiving. Eschewing the modernity of even the low-voltage lighting, the hall had been lit by two massive fireplaces and hundreds of candles mounted in wall sconces and candelabra on the long tables, filling the hall with the warm light of controlled fire. The tables had groaned under the weight of the turkeys, quail, pheasant, venison, hams, and beef roasts, many of which had been cooked in the hall's fireplaces, creating an unbelievable aroma, as well as the squash, potato dishes, and vegetables prepared from the yield of the Stonemont gardens, and apple, cherry, and peach pies from the Stonemont orchards. Now, if you're wondering where all this came from, This was a result of great planning on the part of the Wyatts and the development of the Stonemont community. So, this isn't about, hiding. Well, anyway, we'll go on. The atmosphere had been a combination of joyful celebration and deep thankfulness, as no doubt the first Thanksgiving had been, and the feeling of community had evolved to a palpable level by the time Jim had risen from the chair to speak. He had stood quietly as he waited for the room to see him and calm to near silence, then reached into his pocket and withdrew the slip of paper on which he had copied some lines from the green folder in his den. He had taken a moment to scan the hall, looking at the faces turned toward him, and thinking of what each of them had gone through in the preceding months. Then he began. "I was reading through some of our own old family history earlier today," he said, "and I came across a passage describing one of our branches who came from Switzerland and settled in Virginia during the early 1700s. It struck me that our time is in some ways similar. I think you will see the relevance." He had put on his glasses and begun to read. Now this next part, what I'm quoting here, is directly taken from the journal of one of my ancestors, written back shortly after that time. It says, "At that time, this section was a wilderness. Deer roamed through the forests, and the streams abounded in fish, ducks, and geese. Wild and dangerous beasts were plentiful. They were schooled in the hardships of pioneer times. They felled the giant oak and erected their log cabin in the wild woodlands. They preferred such environment in a land dedicated to religious and political freedom rather than to suffer persecution in their native land." Now that's the end of the quote from my family's journal, but that was written back in the 1700s, and here we are 250 or more years later, and how much could we say the same thing? I'll repeat that last sentence. They preferred such environment in a land dedicated to religious and political freedom rather than to suffer persecution in their native land. He had paused, taking off his glasses, and surveyed the silent faces looking back at him. "We are in a new wilderness, and dangerous beasts are again plentiful, though most of them are two-legged. We are becoming schooled in a new kind of pioneer life, and we felled the trees to build our cabins." They had built some cabins around Stonemont. "But more than any of that, we can see the greatest parallel in their preference to live their lives in a land dedicated to religious and political freedom rather than to suffer under persecution in what their native countries had become. We're in that fight now, aren't we?" The hall remained quiet, and he continued. "Many of us have said that the country we grew up in had ceased to exist long before the collapse. The America that valued liberty, virtue, morality, hard work, and self-reliance had devolved into a semi-socialist state of coddled, dependent, incompetent, politically correct crybabies who were offended by anything with which they disagreed, and who, by their sheer numbers and political influence, were able to stifle and control the producing class, which had done most of the work to support them, consequently driving our once great country into a chaotic decline." He had paused for a moment, noting that many who nodded in affirmation of what he had said. He continued, "The collapse returned us to a reset point." Now, I wrote this some years ago before I had ever heard the term reset as it's used today. I'll start again. "The collapse returned us to a reset point, a point from which it may be possible to rebuild the America we once knew. Whether we will be able to do this will depend on a number of things, some of which will be beyond our control. But we must continue on and dedicate our efforts to those areas over which we do have control. We must build the future we want our children to live in." And I think that's an important point. We have to keep in mind, we can't just try to conserve. We have to build it. I'll say that one more time. We must build the future we want our children to live in. and building means taking an active part in it. Sounds of approval came from the crowd, and he continued. Patrick Henry said that virtue, morality, and religion are the great pillars of government and were the armor that made our country invincible in its early days. John Adams said that the U.S. Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people, and that it was wholly inadequate for the government of any other. There can be no argument that those pillars cracked and crumbled in later years, or that the moral and religious underpinnings of our country dissolved in a cultural increasingly consumed with self and celebrity worship. As Abraham Lincoln, Douglas MacArthur, and many others warned us, the nation which could not be defeated from without was eventually weakened and defeated from within. Well, that was, again, that's from The Revival, my second book of the Stonemont series. And I think it calls us to really take a hard look at what it took to bring our country to the greatness it once had, what we have a right to be thankful for, what we should fight to retain, what we should fight to regain, what we should fight to oppose, and how we should think about actively rebuilding from the mess our country has become, and rebuilding it to a country of however that may look in the future, that we want our children to live in. These people did it once before. History is replete with examples of people who have overthrown oppressive, tyrannical governments or separated themselves from them and began again. We have to see what seems right to each of us and apply ourselves to that with energy and with resolve, and carry this understanding of our history and our past, and use it as the foundation to build our future. So I'll leave it at that, and I wish you all a great day after Thanksgiving, a great holiday season, looking forward to a very Merry Christmas, and that's the business phone, but we don't do business today. And I hope that you are recuperating from your Thanksgiving. May God bless each and every one of you and guide you in the way that you should go. And remember that, as I say on integrative preparedness, we prepare well today in order to live well tomorrow. As I say on American reversion, America needs a reversion, and it needs you to be a part of it. And as we say always on Stonemont Church, let God guide you in what you should do, and leave the results to Him. Okay, you all have a great day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.